Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 from Broadcasting Scotland. In the studio tonight with me, I have a special guest. We have actually two special guests, I beg your pardon. We have Fraser Wilson here in the studio with me tonight. Fraser is an expert on European studies, studied French and Spanish at university, but also he specialises, as I say, in European studies. And on the Skype link this evening with us is Angus Brendan McNeill MP. And Angus is the man who is proposing at the moment a new way of obtaining independence, which gets around the problem of the Section 30 order and the referendum problem. So let's first of all, gentlemen, I think, Angus, if I can come to you first of all this evening, to talk about this remarkable poll which was published today by the Tory peer Lord Ashcroft, which appears to show that independence support in Scotland is now running at 52%. Have you had a chance to digest this yourself, Angus? And do you have a response for us this evening so far?
Yeah, I've seen a good few bits and pieces about the poll. I mean, I think first impression is it's not a surprise. It's what we're hearing anecdotally from people round and about the rise of Boris, the basic catastrophe that is the Tory party. And when we ally that with the Tory party constantly scaring about independence, well, when you see incompetents are against something, you then have to assume that if the incompetents are against it, it's a good thing. Ruth Davidson, I think, has been the leader, the political leader in Scotland that's tweeted most about independence, campaigned most about independence, in a negative way, of course. And the people have given their view of not just independence, but the route the Tories are taking us, and the route the UK is taking Scotland against their will. And the only logical conclusion you can have then is to do what Ireland's done and be safe-ish from the UK, do what Denmark has done, do what Norway has done. We've got societies to catch up with, prosperity to catch up with, and that certainly is not going to happen in a UK that's determined to throw away 8% of GDP in the future because of its hard Brexit stance that Boris Johnson seems to be advocating at present.
It's been much talked about today on social media. In fact, all day long we've been hearing stories from all sides, in fact, about what this means and about whether this poll is complete. Now, coming to you, Fraser, do you feel that the electorate of Scotland has been represented fairly in this poll? Is there anyone missing from it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you're asking if the poll is complete. Obviously, it's shown 52% support for yes, but importantly, this poll excluded 16 and 17-year-olds, and sort of as the figures have shown, under 49s are a majority of yes voters. 18 to 24-year-olds were 72% for yes as well. So it's safe to imagine that if the 16 to 18-year-olds were polled, they'd be showing quite a similar sort of demographic. Well, we also need to remember that the referendum, if the majority of people want it within sort of 2 years, there's going to be people that are younger than 16 presently who are going to be able to vote in that referendum. So we've got a sort of unspoken for part of our society that will have a right to a say in the second independence referendum that are not represented in this poll today, and it's quite likely that they would also be a majority for yes.
And also a fair number of youngsters who currently age 15 or 14 even, who may eventually be added into this demographic of the electorate.
This is the generation that sort of have always lived under devolution. They've sort of just grown up with sort of a Scottish government and a UK government as well, and a Scottish Parliament as well as a UK Parliament, and it's interesting to see that they're sort of predominantly would back independence.
Okay, Angus, back to you again here for some more input on this. The idea of having shall we say, a plebiscite by using an election to decide this matter would surely exclude those 16 and 17-year-olds. Do you not think that would be a major disadvantage, perhaps, to taking that particular route?
Well, it's certainly a good argument against it, and I think that one of the reasons for putting the idea forward is that first to discuss it, and hopefully we hoped that SNP conference was going to be the place for that as its own motion, but now we have to take it as an amendment to another motion. I think the thing needs an airing because if the Scottish Government are playing the Section 30 route and no other alternative route, and if the UK Government then, as I would if I was the UK Government, would just say no and keep them in the box, and the Scottish Government don't come at it with any other lever, then it's a very easy gig for the UK Government to fight against. The idea is, I think we all would like to see the referendum, and perhaps have the referendum at a time of our choosing. By the way, if we choose to have the referendum now, we can't, because the Scottish Government hasn't yet manoeuvred us into a place to do that. But the idea is that we need some form of democratic expression to move towards independence. We can't sit in our hands forever and say, oh, well, Westminster won't allow us. We can find another way. One of the other ways, of course, is by playing with their rules, and I'm confident anyway that playing by their rules, we will win that majority of seats in Scotland. So yes, you're right. It would probably, and it would definitely actually exclude the 16 to 18-year-olds, but would win still on their rules. I think the thing is, we've got to get moving in Scotland, get a campaign going, get people understanding more. I think this poll at the moment, it's dangerous to say what's the motivator in the poll, but I'd say that the motivator in the poll, my own feeling, is that it's more of a negative reason. It's a reason of Boris Johnson, it's a reason of Ruth Davidson, it's a reason of the UK deciding to go to hell in a handcart, if you like, rather than a campaign by the pro-independence side. It's independence for safety. I mean, it doesn't matter which way people get independence, but it's certainly not our work and the work of the Scottish Government that's caused this movement. I think, I remember looking at Twitter about a year ago, and Ruth Davidson was the leader who tweeted most about independence. Clearly her work, of course, is paying dividends now, and the more she tweets about it, perhaps the better.
It could be argued, perhaps, Angus, that negativity won the first referendum in 2014 for the UK, and Project Fear actually worked. It does motivate people to vote in favour of the safe option. So despite what you're saying about perhaps this so-called, this bounce, this Boris bounce in favour of independence is mostly predicated on negative feedback about what's going to happen with Brexit, it is a powerful stimulus nonetheless. And as you're saying, if you're going to play, as you say, by the British rules, and I take it from that you mean during a general election, you would base this this plebiscite on the number of seats won rather
Correct.
than the number of votes cast. Am I right?
Yeah, correct. It's a first past the post system. They always tell us how good the first past the post system is. Margaret Thatcher herself, that now great deity of the Brexiteer and the Unionists, once said that a majority of Scottish seats for the SNP when she thought it was impossible. So we'll take that goalpost if that's a goalpost they want to leave remaining on the park. I would prefer the goalpost of a referendum, but whatever goalposts are there, we're going to have to play with them, and we have to move with that. It's a fascinating point you had there, by the way, that the negative might be the motivating factor in the poll here. Of course, I would also caution that the positive campaign of 2014 added 17%. So I would maybe add the negative from the Tories, and if we get a positive together, we can see this number increasing yet again. But at the moment, I think 2019 is going to be taken up from the Scottish Government's point of view of getting some legislation through Parliament on referendums, whereas that, in my book, should have happened in the last few years, and we'd be in the campaign phase at the moment. But anyway, we are where we are, and happily we're in a good position in the polls. It is good news, but we know we have to capitalise on this.
Thank you. Coming back to you, Fraser, if, as we can see here, that there's a possibility of European Scots not included in this poll, as well as the youngsters obviously not included in this poll, but European Scots would be included in a referendum. Have we any information at all on how many Europeans there are living in Scotland at the moment and what their intentions might be?
I do not know the sort of exact figure for the amount of Europeans that are living in Scotland at the moment, but certainly from conversations that I've had with Europeans living in Scotland that I know, I'd say that a sort of majority of them would sort of back independence. And I think sort of going back to what we were saying about the sort of negativity maybe from Westminster being an asset for us, I think sort of having a combination of the sort of what are the push factors for independence? What's pushing us away from being a part of the UK? Again, sort of what's a pull factor for sort of what's the sort of appeal of independence to us? And I think for a lot of Europeans, they can sort of see that Scotland's a sort of certainly a more sort of open,
more open,
society
progressive
just now,
place.
and more progressive place. Sort of certainly that's not a sort of flat rule, but I think predominantly Europeans feel a bit more sort of welcome here and a bit more at home here than you could say for down south. And that's certainly the sort of idea that I've got from Europeans that I've spoken to. One of
the particular demographics of Europeans I was thinking of actually are those who work in the education sector, in the universities,
yes,
and in the schools as well. But the whole idea that Scottish research can be hurt by this, Scottish engineering, Scottish space programme, and Scottish science, generally medical science, is going to be hurt by this if all of these European workers are excluded, leads me to think that this is another positive for Europeans wanting to stay here, and we need to be able to reassure them. If I could come back to you, Angus, just for a moment, as the politician here this evening, what can we do, or what can you do as politicians to try and to reassure our European Scots who are living here at the moment, working here, perhaps in the education or the sciences or industries? How can we get over to them the fact that we will eventually become independent, they will be able to stay? Is there any way we can calm their nerves?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a quite simple answer to that. The answer is, when we are independent, we want to behave like any other independent European nation that's within the European Union. And of course, when you're inside the European Union, they can all just sit back and rest that they will have rights, the sort of rights the Scots will have to go to Ireland or to go to Spain or to go to Poland or wherever the Scots want to go. Those rights will be reciprocated for people from other countries, be they Greece or Italy or France or whatever, that want to come to Scotland. I think the idea that's been, or certainly the argument in Scotland over the last number of years, one that we've never shied away from, I can think going back to elections past, we've always said, and we've never been afraid to say this, that migrants are of huge benefit to our society. It's a win-win situation. We've never gone to try and placate any tabloid. Of course, the tabloids weren't going to do us any favours anyway, so we might as well call the tabloids out honestly and say that they were scaremongering trash was what they were doing. And I think that message has been hitting home to EU citizens living in Scotland more and more. I think a number were duped in 2014, but a number of people were duped by the sophisticated campaign of fear in 2014, pensioners included, and Indigenous pensioners. But now I think people have taken stock and watched, and when they've seen the actual behaviour, they've seen the false promises of the other side, but they've seen also the follow-through behaviour from our side. I would think that in most and just about everything we said, we follow through, and it's not rhetoric. That European Union citizens are welcome. It makes sense that they're welcome, of course, for us and for them. Everybody's a winner with this. And if you exclude the nasty tabloids, there's nobody really calling for any curbs on European citizens. It's something that's needed. And I particularly know that in my own constituency in Hillingen and Yere, any and all European citizens that are here are very welcome. I've been contributing hugely to our society in a variety of ways, and we're very lucky to have them. So I think that reassurance that's the way we want to go forward, and within that framework, an established framework, a framework that people trust, is the way forward.
I know we've only got you on the Skype link for a limited time this evening, Angus, so I had one other question I wanted to put to you. I don't know if you've considered this, but is the idea that you're proposing with Chris McElhinney of using using an election as a means of deciding independence, would that become Plan A, or is it going to be Plan B, do you think?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I mean, the goalposts I want to use are the goalposts of a referendum. But if that's not available to us, and if the Scottish Government agree with the UK Government on that, then it might well indeed become Plan A. But, I think we should be discussing this very soon as an SNP, and that's why we're hoping to have it done in conference in October, because, there could be an election later this year, we could ask the government before the election, do we get a Section 30? We'd actually use it as a lever. Do we get this referendum when we want in 2020 or not? And if they say no, okay, then we use the election. So we now have a springboard, a huge lever after an election to move forward to independence with. These guys can't say no forever, but I think the McElhenny-McNeill Plan B actually helps the Plan A quite a lot and strengthens the Scottish Government's hand in negotiations to say, look, we've got another club in the bag. We're heading up the fairway here. If you put us in the bunker, we've got something to get ourselves out of the bunker with. So I think it makes sense in a number of ways. And if somebody else can come up with a Plan C, I'd be glad to hear it, because anything that moves us on and gets the powers that we currently have over Scotland that are residing in Westminster, and we complete devolution, we have total devolution, which is independence. Once we move everything to us and we have like a normal nation like Denmark, like Sweden, like Ireland, then whatever achieves that has to be a good idea. Whichever is stimulating people to work and to move to that end has to be a good idea. But simply sitting back, as I've unfortunately found some prominent members in the Scottish Government saying there's not a lot we can do if they say no, is not good enough, and I actually found that quite alarming. And that's why I wrote my letter after SNP conference last year, after a conversation I had where they sort of felt there was nothing they could do if Westminster says no. There's loads we can do. And as I was saying earlier, nations don't get given their independence, they take their independence, and we've got to be creative in the ways we take our independence. So any plans that anybody's got listening or watching, yes, please contribute them and let's discuss them. And I think maybe tonight you've had an argument against the Plan B about excluding the 16 to 18-year-olds, but I think we can argue around that as well. So the good thing about having a motion or having an idea is allowing people to pick holes in your argument, thinking about the argument, and then having to defend, improve or abandon your argument, depending on how the circumstances play out.
Whilst I can see the advantages of what you're proposing in terms of the fact that having an election would put the result beyond doubt, because having already established this, if you establish this at your conference, that this is policy, if that's declared in the mandate as the prime manifesto pledge, then a win would then establish the right to negotiate, surely, and therefore the UK could not then prevaricate or pretend that there is some reason why they could discount this result. In other words, if we have a referendum, they were bound to say, well, you didn't conduct it fairly, or you didn't have a Section 30 order, or you didn't have a large enough share of the vote. And I think, personally, from my own perspective, that your proposal seems to get rid of those problems. I think we've lost the link. Brendan, are you still with us? Yeah, Angus?
Yes. Yeah, and if you wanted to hybrid the two, you could always say that you could change policy to be, in the absence of a referendum, any subsequent election where the SNP or pro-independence parties get more than 51% of the vote. So you might not go with just their rules, you might hybridise the rules if you wanted to. But we've got to start thinking and start to be creative about other ways of doing this. If they're saying no to a referendum and the Scottish Government are agreeing with them on no to a referendum, then policy could be in any election in the future when the pro-independence side is 51%, then that could be the mandate to independence. That's not my position at the moment. My position is that we play by their rules. If we don't have a referendum, a majority of seats moves us towards independence. But I think we really have to start to get this moving, and particularly at the moment when we're seeing, as the reason for the discussion tonight, 52% of the Scottish electorate are ready to support independence. Okay, Lord Ashcroft can harness that, but can the Scottish Government harness that? Can we provide that evidence in another way that actually enables that opinion poll wish to go through? At the moment we can't, and that is quite alarming, because if this poll was to rise to 60%, to 70%, even 100%, how can that be harnessed? And that is a question that many people in the Scottish Government might have to start to address and to think about quite quickly, because what's going to happen in Scotland if they don't? Well, we're going to the bottom with Brexit UK.
So you feel we're creating a groundswell and an expectation, and as the polls rise, then the demand for a referendum will gain momentum with it. I had initially, when I first started broadcasting and talking about independence, one of my major problems with it was, how do we communicate to the First Minister when the people want independence? Because there isn't a mechanism other than polling with which to do it. Is polling the only way in which the people can make their feelings known?
I think it's probably the best and most immediate way. You have to wait for the electoral cycle and for things to come forward and for things to move on. But you know, polling itself is riskier. And remember, of course, that 3 weeks before the Remain, the Brexit referendum, Remain was at 60%, and then we know what happened in the result across the UK then. So, you know, I mean, I know that some of my colleagues are thinking we've got to wait for the polls to be in a certain place before we do anything. Well, I disagree with that. We have to create the polls. We have to have a campaign going. We saw the last time when we started with 28, you know, and we sat back in 2014 and say, oh, well, 28%, it's no worth trying. We wouldn't have actually changed the minds of another 17%, upwards now, going onwards to about 24%, because we're up at 52 at the moment. So the idea of engaging with people, having an argument, giving them reasons, giving them thoughts why we should be moving forward to independence, that process itself actually changes minds. Sitting around waiting for people to automatically change their minds doesn't actually bring very many major gains or yields. We've only put on, if you like, on this poll, and assuming this poll is sustained, 7% since 2014, whereas the time before that we had put on 17% when we're engaged in an active argument. We have to get in the active argument phase, and I think that the mistake that's been made in some places of not having the active argument has also left us in a place where we can't harness any of these votes, even if it comes up to 100%, because we have not prepared a mechanism. There is no referendum we can hold. We're not ready if an election is called tomorrow to use an election to do that. What is the way? So, you know, I'm speaking quite frankly here as an SNP MP as to how we move that forward. Thinking has to be done, and Scottish people have to be able to, if they want, move to independence. And our arguments to improve society have to be made, and we have to make sure that we're moving towards that aim and not just hoping for the best with our fingers crossed, or else, or even worse, saying they won't agree to a Section 30, there's nothing we can do.
Angus, listen, thank you for your time. I think, frankly, I don't think there's any chance that the people who support independence now are in any way going to give up the fight just because we've seen one poll. I think there are somewhere in the region of 290,000 people who watch one of my other programmes through the daytime who would say otherwise. You're all raring to go. They're just waiting for the First Minister to say go, and they will be off.
I'm with you.
Well, Angus, listen, thank you very much for your time this evening, and we appreciate it, and good luck in convincing your colleagues at the SNP conference in the coming days.
Well, if they want to hear the argument, but anyway, that's a discussion for another day. Well, thanks very much for having me.
Well, we look forward to having you back on the show later on, find out how things have gone after the conference.
Very good. Cheers.
All right, Angus, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, interesting stuff. I think you'll agree there, Fraser. I know your expertise is mostly in European matters. I was actually wanting to ask Angus a little bit about, when he was talking about the positives of independence and remaining in Europe, what those positives are. I mean, are there better pensions? Is there greater human rights to be had? Are we more protected under European law?
Yeah, well, we will have political clout if we're as part of Europe. Automatically, if we're an independent country within the EU, our MEPs would go up from 6 to, I believe, 13. So we'd have an automatic doubling of the representation within the European institutions. We would have a rotation eventually of the European Council presidency. I believe it's with Malta.
Would we also have a commissioner?
Yeah. Each member state would have its own European commissioner as well. So there's a vast array of different benefits that we get as an independent EU member state.
So double the number of members of the European Parliament, and our own commissioner to fight our corner in the Commission itself.
And our own turn at taking the European presidency and having giving guidance as sort of where the European Union should be sort of taking
being
things
able
moving
to make
forward.
Scotland's ideas
Yeah,
more known and maybe enacted
and
through
also
the European Council.
just a little bit sort of more respect as sort of as part of a greater sort of political entity. We've seen Ireland be one of 27, and its rights are being protected, and sort of its wishes are being protected by the EU in the Brexit negotiations. We are one of 4, and there's sort of just no representation of us.
If we remain in Europe, if we become independent, I'm assuming that we would, what would change for your average Scot? Would their pensions increase? Would things be brought into line with other sort of harmonisation in Europe?
So
Would taxes change? What do we actually know?
So I'm not quite sure sort of exactly. I know that sort of being part of Europe as opposed to sort of where we are just now and sort of having access to the sort of a free market of sort of 400 million people, and then access to the free trade deals that are sort of the EU has negotiated on our
human rights
behalf.
be fully protected under, under the European Court?
The Court of Human Rights, when the Conservatives are sort of planning on sort
They
of
want to scrap that.
scrapping that and bringing their own in, and I wouldn't really trust a human rights bill that's drafted
The
by
reason
the
I was
Conservative
asking you
Party.
about the reason I was asking you about the pensions is that I had heard, although I'm not sure if it's confirmed or not, that the European Union was suggesting a pension figure for all its countries, so that the pensions were roughly equivalent in value in every European state. Now, obviously, that's a complicated calculation, but bearing in mind that the UK pension is the second lowest in the developed world, it could only go up, one would presume. And I would hope that this might be something that we could mention on the doorsteps if people are campaigning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sort of giving sort of a little bit more equality to Europe and sort of as a whole, and sort of having a more sort of European kind of identity as well.
Do you think, just maybe on a final point, I know that some of your expertise is also in banking from our earlier conversations. Will Scotland's banking sector benefit from remaining in the European Union? Does it make it easier, for example, to transact business across Europe?
Yeah, so there's a thing called passports, and my sort of banking knowledge is very limited, but I certainly know that there's an idea of passporting, and that is sort of allowing for banks to sort of have the right to sort of conduct operations in other sort of European countries, and that's sort of possible when you're part of the EU. The problem that the City of London's going to have is obviously it's going to leave the EU fairly soon. So all of those banks are already sort of gearing up for moving headquarters to Frankfurt or to Paris or to Dublin. Edinburgh's already got quite a sort of large financial sector anyway, so that it could market itself as a destination for these large financial institutions, sort of base the headquarters there and create quite a lot of jobs for a lot of people within Scotland and working for those new banks and those new headquarters.
Okay, well, listen, thank you for your input as well on the story, Fraser. We're moving on now to the story which has reached the media today. Actually, this is a story about the mainstream media who are having a go at Jeane Freeman, who is the SNP government spokesperson for health, and the ongoing problems with the new Sick Children's Hospital, which Jeane Freeman actually had to cancel the opening of because of problems which were showing up in safety reviews of the ventilation system in the hospital. And it seems like the mainstream media has gone into absolute feeding frenzy of SNP bad, Scotland bad storytelling about this hospital, even going to the enormous lengths of saying that somebody who I haven't heard the name, but I believe it was a trade union representative at the hospital had suggested that part of the new hospital might even have to be demolished in order for a problem with the drainage to be fixed. Have you heard much about this yourself, Fraser?
I've not heard much about the sort of issues with the sort of hospital in question, but I know that sort of, I mean, the NHS has got, in Scotland and in England, the NHS is sort of, there are sort of issues there. I just sort of wonder though with the idea of sort of the media going in really hard in this story on the same day as the poll was
Well,
just
after
discussing this come out.
you remember the case of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Govan having an alleged link between two suspicious deaths in the hospital through a disease which was linked tangentially with pigeon droppings, and the massive media scrum that happened with that, which forced the complete review of all the ventilation systems in that hospital. And because of that, this new children's hospital has also been under the microscope a lot more, I think,
see.
because of this. But why do you think the British media is so keen to make out that these hospitals are such a bad design and such a failure?
Well, I sort of wonder if the same issues are sort of happening down south, if there's similar issues and similar problems and stuff.
I've not heard anything like
Don't really
that.
hear that much about it, maybe because the news cycle is dominated by sort of Brexit and Cataclysm and Boris Johnson and new cabinet appointments and sort of the political pony show that is Westminster, is that actual sort of news that is happening is sort of not being shown as much. And then I think maybe up here it could be slightly different and these things are paid more attention to.
We often hear that particularly the BBC's media agenda seems to be based on anything bad about the Scottish NHS is given prominence, regardless of how minor it is. And in this case, it seems that there's even suggestions that this hospital might not even open at all, is being put about at the moment in the mainstream media. And it just is a lynch mob, basically, of media having a go at Jeane Freeman for basically taking the safe route, for making sure that people are safe in the hospital. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be good enough.
Yeah, when's it ever going to be good enough? I guess you could ask. I suppose, it's sort of important that we sort of take these sort of steps sort of to ensure that things are done correctly. You don't want to go ahead and just open the hospital and then find the problems afterwards. I
understand that the hospital in question was built using a PFI project fund, and it's a trust, and it's been set up obviously to build the hospital and then lease it back to the local NHS trust. And the Scottish Government must have some input from them on this, I would have thought, on how this is to be handled. But if the site itself was so poorly drained, you would have thought the contractors would have flagged that up at a very early stage when they were doing the groundwork.
Exactly. I think there needs to be a bit more sort of scrutiny of the work that contractors are doing and who are getting these contracts to build these facilities that are very much in the public interest.
I think it's a design and build structure. It's a complete contract from beginning to end with one consortium. But
should it be just with one
but the client
consortium? Though
the client isn't the government.
You'd think it would be a better idea though to sort of have different contractors that are specialised in different areas that work on different parts of the hospital.
I'm sure they are, but the problem I think is that the person who is actually or the organisation commissioning the work is not the Health Board and it's not the Scottish Government. It's this private finance consortium, this group of investors who are specifying the hospital, how it should be built. But now we have the Conservative Party asking today for there to be a public inquiry and getting the Auditor General of Scotland to come in and examine how this hospital came to be built so poorly. I think it looks very much like it's a failure of the PFI system.
I would agree.
Rather than the government.
I think there sort of needs to be a wholesale sort of look at sort of the PFI process, and I think those people high up that are taking those decisions should have a bit more sort of link to the health sector to actually know what it is that they need and how it is to go about doing it, and what it is that sort of. But also, need from their hospitals.
The Scottish Government is basically in a cleft stick because they have to stick to Westminster government spending rules, and that means they couldn't actually directly commission the hospital themselves. They would have to go to the lowest tender and they can't borrow money to build a hospital because they're not allowed to. So somebody from the private sector has to raise the cash and the capital. And then the hospital is commissioned by the person or the people who've provided the capital, which isn't the Scottish Government and isn't the Health Board. And all this seems to sort of, if you follow the trail back, seems to follow the trail all the way back down to Westminster and the restrictions.
Yep, absolutely.
I've just been told that under the current system, eventually when the hospital is finally opened, it will eventually become the property of the Scottish Government. But this is in complete contrast to previous PPIs and PFI contracts under the Labour government, where it was never owned by the local authority or the Health Board. Okay. And of course, the Conservative Party backs the PFI programme because it's very much in the free market capitalist mould.
Yeah, I don't like the sort of idea of the health service being involved with the private sector in any sort of form.
Do you think the health service should remain a service and not an industry?
It should remain a service and not an industry, and not something to be profited upon, I think.
Basically a human need rather than a business need. To be...
Yeah.
Well, of course, the construction sector is separate from that. Unfortunately, they do have to make money, I suppose. But there was a time when they would have commissioned a hospital directly from a contractor and paid for it themselves. Now we can't do this. And they would probably have had a more talented crowd of architects to do the job. Anyway, moving on to our next story this evening, which is EU citizens being denied universal credit. Another story which has appeared today in the press. What do you make of this? Why would European citizens living in the UK be denied universal credit?
It gives me sort of hostile environment vibes, sort of like Theresa May sort of style for sort of.
Theresa May's
making the comparison to sort of Theresa May's hostile environment sort of policy when she was Home Secretary, and when you read a story like that, saying that European citizens are being sort of denied universal credit wrongly, it sort of, I don't know, it gives me bad sort of vibes as to why they're being sort of singled out to sort of...
You would expect there to be a tit for tat on this from other European countries denying British immigrants.
Well, this is the scary thing. It's a scary sort of game to play, and it also sort of reminds me of the trouble that some European citizens had voting in the last European elections that lived here. There was widespread reports across the country of European citizens turning up to polling stations and being turned away, saying that they didn't have the right documentation in and stuff, even though they were saying that they had and they'd done it all correctly, yet it still wasn't enough for them to be able to express their democratic vote.
So you think this is the hostile environment, the tightening the screws on the Europeans?
It does feel that way a little bit, and sort of when you keep seeing these stories of European citizens coming into sort of having trouble and gaining sort of services, they have a right to vote, they have a right to sort of live here in this country and access our benefit system if they've
Well, the SNP has criticised this obviously today. They've come out with this press release, and they've called for the Department for Work and Pensions to immediately investigate why there's been an increase in these cases and for statistics to be published on the numbers of successful and unsuccessful applications made by EU citizens since June 2015, and what the reason is for the unsuccessful applications, why they were rejected, in other words. So there's obviously something going on here. Whether it's gradually being introduced, it seems that it has been happening gradually by what I'm reading here. Neil Gray MP, commenting for the SNP, has said, "What's happening to our EU citizens under the Tories' watch is nothing short of a disgrace. The UK government must investigate the situation without delay and make available the relevant figures to ensure there's no malpractice in assessing universal credit claims made by EU nationals." As far as I understand it, there is nothing in the universal credit which precludes a European national who's currently living here, working here, and who's paid taxes here from getting universal credit.
No, there shouldn't be. If a European citizen has sort of moved over here and is sort of paying their taxes into the system, then there should be no sort of asterisk there saying sort of, oh, yeah, you're not sort of welcome to this benefit that you've sort of paid in for, really, as a contributing member of our society. So it's a disgraceful thing to sort of here that's happening.
So it really just should not be happening at all.
Just should not be happening, and
So-
I sort of back the claims for, or back the calls for an investigation into it. with
Let's hope they get
DWP.
one.
Absolutely.
The next story this evening concerns Tesco. And Tesco have announced today that they are to cut 4,500 jobs in Metro restructuring. The Metro, if I remember correctly, is Tesco's high street.
I think it's like the sort of
They're slightly bigger stores on
mid-range
the high
sort of
streets.
stores.
And
Yeah,
cities.
it's the big stores, not your.
So there
little
obviously is a
local ones.
problem with this retail model in some way, but otherwise they wouldn't be wanting to shed so many jobs. And the question is, does this have anything to do with Brexit, or is this completely isolated? According to Tesco themselves, we'll see what they've said here. Their medium-sized shops found on the high streets, railway stations, they're going to shift stock more quickly to the shelves and cut the time that it's held in the storeroom. And Tesco said the Metro stores had originally been intended for customers making a weekly shop, but as consumer habits have changed, they've now served those buying food daily and changing their logistics. So they've become more like a corner shop, it seems.
Yeah, I mean,
People with less money shopping more frequently.
I mean, sort of mostly when I've sort of went to a Tesco Metro, I must say it's not been for a big weekly shop.
You're going
It's
for a
been
loaf of
more
bread
a
with
sort
hide
of-
the milk.
Yeah, essentially. And I think it could be sort of to do with sort of the, like certainly the Metro stores that I've sort of encountered. They're quite sort of, they're in like sort of city centres mostly. It's not like your big massive out of town like superstores. I would go there if I was doing like a big weekly shop.
These stores remind me of the first ever supermarkets that opened in Glasgow, which were usually on major streets and were bigger than a corner shop, but not as big as a real supermarket is now. But
I think sort of.
apparently they are keeping their smaller stores. What do they call the Tesco Express? Is it?
Tesco
I think.
Express.
Yeah. They are planning to keep those. It says the market leader has largely outperformed its three biggest rivals, Sainsbury's, Asda and Morrison's, in the last year, but it's remained under pressure from German discounters Aldi and Lidl, which continue to take the market share from all the grocery retailers. So the Germans might have lost the war, but they're winning the retail battle in the UK at the moment.
Well, I must say I sort of much prefer sort of Aldi and Lidl. I mostly shop at Lidl. I've not got an Aldi quite close to me, but they're cheaper and also quality as well. I think sort of in terms of if you look at the sort of own brand products that Lidl do as opposed to sort of the own brand products that Tesco do, it's sort of night and day in terms of quality that you're getting from Lidl. Against Tesco, if I'm going to a Tesco or Sainsbury's, it's normally they're sort of little convenience stores, whether that's for like a pint of milk, a loaf of bread or whatever. But if I'm going to do like a big shop, I'll always go to Lidl or to Aldi, and I'll endeavour to make the trip for that rather than endeavour to make the trip to go to a big Tesco.
Well, let's hope they don't have to lay off too many people. But I can see problems coming for all the high street retailers shortly, because we all know that Brexit will involve massive taxes on all imports
I
from
think
Europe,
as well,
up to 40%.
The sort of supermarket industry's got to look at sort of external to it, like you've seen over in the States. Amazon's bought Whole Foods, and I believe Ocado Foods have signed an agreement with someone that'll sort of allow them to sort of do like deliveries, sort of like
more people buying their groceries
within hours
online now.
rather than sort of have a next day delivery, and sort of
I think
people
it's
have that flexibility now.
I think it's Marks and Spencer's with Ocado.
Marks and Spencer's with Ocado, that's
I'm
it.
told. Okay, well, let's move on from this slightly depressing story of the declining retail businesses of the UK, and on to Hong Kong. Now, you can't really have failed to see this story on your screens over the last few weeks. The people in Hong Kong have rejected the mainland Chinese government's imposition of a new extradition treaty, which they were told, as I understand it, was in order for them to extradite fugitives, criminals from the mainland who might have escaped to the island. But obviously the islanders of Hong Kong don't believe this. They obviously feel threatened by this, and they think now that this is the thin end of the wedge. The Chinese government, Beijing, now trying to restrain Hong Kong, trying to bring it into Chinese control.
Yeah.
Have you been following the story yourself?
I've been following it, not at sort of with any closeness, but I have sort of been keeping up with sort of developments that are going on, and it is certainly very worrying. And I can empathise with people living in Hong Kong as being sort of a bit worried about this extradition bill that the Chinese government is trying to introduce. I think the sort of thing with sort of Hong Kong is it's almost like a sort of like a ticking time bomb almost. It's sort of when 1997 and they sort of signed the British-Chinese agreement, it was 50 years of Hong Kong would sort of have its own rule there. But we're only...
its own autonomy for 50
it's
years.
Only, another 20 years or so that there'll be before that agreement is up.
Nobody either here or in Hong Kong really seems to know what the mandarins, if you want to call them that, of the Communist Party in China actually have in mind for the island. It's according to Reuters today, police fired tear gas at protesters in multiple parts of Hong Kong on Monday after a general strike hit transport, and the city's Beijing-backed leader warned its prosperity was at risk. So this is Carrie Lam is now threatening the people with, I'm presuming, austerity, because if their prosperity is at risk, then there is a veiled threat there that things are going to get worse. It says the protests surpassed earlier shows of dissent in scale and intensity, seemingly stoked by Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam's refusal, once again, to meet any of the protesters' demands and warning of an extremely dangerous situation. So they're seeing an escalation here between the protesters on one side and increasingly violent and more repressive techniques being used by the Hong Kong police.
Yeah. Which is very worrying, and it does make you wonder sort of how long will it be until someone gets seriously hurt.
Yeah, apparently the Chinese Red Army is waiting in the background to take control. Very ominous times indeed if you're a Hong Kong citizen.
Absolutely.
It says also here, amidst the extensive disruptions to trains and traffic, tens of thousands of demonstrators fanned out across Hong Kong, spreading pockets of activism to most of its three main regions, the island, Kowloon and the New Territories. Police stations were besieged and roads occupied. People are obviously, they're taking to the streets because they fear what's going to happen
because
next.
They fear and they want sort of something to change, and I back them sort of protesting and sort of way and causing sort of inconvenience and to sort of people, because that's the only sort of way that you're going to eventually sort of get change. I mean, you've seen sort of the impact that the Gilets jaunes had in France sort of at the end of last year. They were closing a lot of roads. And they're still going on.
Mainstream media in France is not showing all of the violence, but as well as the yellow vests in France, there are now the black vests, and these are, these are African immigrants who have come to France looking for work, and they're now campaigning for fairer treatment from the French government. So everywhere you look at the moment, former colonial people are rebelling in one way or another, and even in Kashmir. Today we discovered that there's another move afoot. This time the Indian government is planning to tear up an agreement where they administered Kashmir on behalf of its people but allowed them autonomy. Now the Indian government has said that it wishes to relax the rules on who can move there, presumably so that more non-Muslim, more Hindu people can settle there, beginning to look a little bit like the Israel and Palestine situation developing in India. And this seems to be worldwide at the moment. Problems everywhere we look. Countries are destabilising.
Sort of caused by colonialism that happened.
It seems to be part of a wider pattern at the moment. Maybe the rising temperatures around the world are inflaming people's tempers as well. And talking of tempers brings us to the next story, the horrific mass shootings in America in the past 2 days. One in Ohio and the other one in
El Paso, Texas.
In El Paso, just on the north side of the border with Mexico.
Yes.
Now, To my mind, at least, America has got the biggest gun problem of any country in the
Well,
world.
by far.
I was looking at the statistics. The number of mass shootings in the United States this year alone is 251.
Yeah, so they're classing a mass shooting
Not
as-
251 people, but 251.
Yeah, so they're classing
mass
a mass shooting
shootings.
as a shooting in which at least 4 people have died.
Yeah, we're talking hundreds of people
So
being
you're talking
killed every year.
the amount of
thousands.
people that sort of aren't even included in that, where like sort of one person has died from being shot by a gun, or 2 or 3 people have. That's not accounted for in that 200
I mean, the rest
odd
of the
figure.
world's figures for mass shootings was 7
with 7.
for the whole rest of the world. It's
do you-
only
do you
America
see,
that has mass shootings.
Donald Trump today finally sort of semi-wishy-washy condemned white nationalism and sort of terrorism and sort of hate and stuff, but his claims for sort of what is causing this is the internet, video games, and mental illness. Now,
He was claiming that this white supremacist was mentally ill.
yeah,
So what is it? The implication of that is you can be a white supremacist as long as you don't shoot people.
and it's also
Shoot
sort
people
of
you're
saying that
mentally
if
ill.
you're,
It's okay to be a racist as long as you don't indulge in a mass shooting.
and it's also trying to say that if you've got mental health issues, that is a justification for going out and killing people. Hundreds of thousands of people have got
It might also be a justification
mental
for the
health
police shooting you dead as well.
issues. Yeah, but to sort of say
Either
that.
way.
To sort of say that mental health issues are sort of a cause of gun crime is an absolute ludicrous thing to say, I would say.
It seems that one of the shooters, I think it was the El Paso shooter, actually surrendered to police. He, I think, models himself a little bit on Anders Breivik.
Yes.
And well, somebody said, "Can you imagine if he'd been black?"
Well, this is. Have you seen? There's
Would he have been allowed to surrender at
there's a
all?
photo going round on Twitter that is comparing the shooter to, I believe, it's a photo of Eric Garner when he was sort of arrested, and it's showing sort of the sort of aggression that the police took towards him. It's like pinning him to the ground where he couldn't breathe, compared to them just sort of standing around the shooter in Texas. That this is a man that's just killed 20 people, and you're treating him just like you're just walking up the street with him.
We're all standing there going, "Could you please get in the van, sir?"
Whereas Eric Garner had done absolutely nothing wrong, and the police killed him through excessive violence.
One of the spokespersons for the anti-gun lobby in America was on the radio this afternoon on Radio 4, and what she said I thought was telling. She said, if you need to protect your home, why do you need an assault rifle to do it? An assault rifle is an attack weapon which is designed for military use to wipe out as many people as possible. Defending your home would take a one-shot gun, or a revolver at the very most. And the idea that you can walk into a shop, buy 250 rounds of ammunition and a machine gun and walk out the door with them could never happen in any other country on the planet except America. And I sometimes think, well, it maybe explains a lot about why America exports war to so many other countries, because it has a war going on at home.
It's very telling of sort of where the US is in 2019 on a moral level, is that when a mass shooting occurs, that the question is not sort of like the question that is asked is, was the shooter black or white, and sort of what that's going to mean for how it's portrayed going forward. Like that shouldn't be should be completely irrelevant. It's like sort of waiting to find out whether the shooter was black or white, so that it sort of plays to your own sort of narrative. Like the sort of what the emphasis should be on is there is a big problem with guns here, and people keep getting killed by gun shooting. We need to actually do something about this.
It's astonishing. I have a friend actually who deliberately moved to Scotland because she couldn't stand the outbreaks of shooting around her neighbourhood at night, and she lived in quite a posh part of the capital of Washington DC, and every night she said there would be gunfire from the neighbouring, over the neighbour's fence basically, and she just got sick of it.
It's astonishing. To think that that's normalised in one of the largest countries on earth. It's like I can't imagine living in a place where I'm sort of always got in the back of my mind that someone could come in and shoot us all today, that it happens so sort of commonly.
And the American people's attitude to this is that the correct response to a mass shooting is thoughts and prayers and vigil and candles.
Prayers, yeah.
And then it happens again the following week. It just seems unbelievable. Anyway, talking of unbelievable things, brings us to the Edinburgh Festival performers. And this is a story which tickled me because I think it's a little cheeky, but it's fun. And these festival performers are refusing to be paid in pounds sterling. Now, why is this, do you think?
I
What are
feel
they trying
for,
to tell us?
I don't know. I feel for some festival performance, it could maybe be a little bit of a stunt, maybe.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's an important sort of message behind it, is that sterling has like plummeted in sort of value right now. So I sort of always say that. So I lived in Brussels from September 2015 till January 2016. So this is before Brexit, and I remember getting 1.48, I think I got pounds to the euro. And so if I and my rent was sort of so many euros per month, and I calculated it as, if I lived in Brussels sort of now today, like my rent would automatically be £100 a month more expensive,
Well,
exclusively based on the exchange rate today.
Well, it's funny, you think that these were fringe performers we're talking about. These are the headline acts. These are big professional outfits.
Wow.
That are coming to the international festival.
And they're actually refusing
So
sterling.
they've come
'cause
from
it's
other
not-
countries,
and
and they're saying, we don't want to be paid in your monopoly money because it's not
'cause
worth
it's worthless. That's pretty damning.
I think even the fact that it's happening at all and it's coming from that source and it's not a joke means that it's all the more important for Scotland to have a currency when it becomes independent, because
You can compare it to there was an instance where I think not long after the Brexit vote, there was I think it was Copenhagen Airport was offering more for a Scottish note
Same
than it
in
was
Abu
for an
Dhabi.
English note.
Yep.
Abu Dhabi as well. Yeah, they like.
money changers
Yeah.
offer more for Scottish.
So you can't use your
banknotes.
Scottish tenner for a taxi in London, but it'll be worth more halfway across the world.
Go to Abu Dhabi and we'll get a lot more for it. The other thing, though, is that the longer that Brexit goes on, the longer the uncertainty goes on, the deeper the pound plunges. It's now it's approaching parity with the euro at the moment.
Which is unthinkable.
And according to reports I read last week, the projections of the Bank of England say that in a no-deal Brexit situation, it'll fall another 25 percentage points. And I calculated that would mean a US dollar against the pound would be worth 94 cents American. Absolutely incredible. We'd be talking
it's
about
mind-boggling.
a dollar pound. Effectively, the dollar would wipe the pound out, and we could probably abolish the pound altogether and just use dollars.
Yeah.
Because how else are we going to sell our oil? We certainly wouldn't want to sell it in pounds after that.
Well, there's precedent for that of other countries sort of using the dollar, so it could be done. And it is quite wild to think that is a better option than keeping the pound currently.
Well, listen, that's about all we've got time for tonight on the show. I'd like to thank Fraser. Fraser, thanks very much for being with us tonight and being a guest. And also thank you to Angus Brendan McNeil of the SNP for being on the Skype with us this evening. I'll be back on the show this Thursday at 7 o'clock to present another edition this Thursday. And Kenny, my colleague, will be presenting tomorrow night's show. So anyway, until then, from all the team here at Broadcasting Scotland and from Scotland at 7, a very good night to you. Good night.